All right, we are live. All right, welcome everybody. All right, we're going to get busy here. One of my first lives during the day in a while. So we'll see how that works out. All right, welcome everybody. All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. All right. So welcome everybody. And I know as people come on, we're going to have a lively discussion today. And I realize it's not my normal time to go live, but I want to try to mix it up some to to get part of audiences that I don't normally get a chance to talk with. And so today I'm going to have a guest on, Bev Mitelman, and we're going to talk about overcoming heartbreak, but we're going to take a different approach to it um, based on your attachment style. And I know some of you are saying attachment style, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've heard of, yeah, I'm a little anxious, or maybe, I avoid certain things. But today we wanted to add some clarity to that. And I wanted to kind of have Bev on to help anybody who have you ever experienced something and you get attached to people and it didn't go quite like you wanted it, and then you got emotionally involved, and the next thing you knew, it became this emotional catastrophe. Yes. And so that's kind of, I'm gonna tell you something. I believe that this is probably gonna rub some people the wrong way. I believe everybody should have their heart broken at least once. That's just my take. And then probably you're like, Ken, why? Here's why I believe that. Because if you've had your heart broken, then you know what it feels like when you do it to someone else, so that you won't want to. That's just my take on it. So yeah, but I'm going to bring up my guest, and we're going to talk about it. So without further ado, but before I bring up my guest, if anybody's listening to me today, I always do this, and I almost forgot. Number one, tell me your name and where you're checking in from, because I think I'm doing Facebook and YouTube today. I normally have my and Instagram and TikTok, but I can't do all of that. So if you don't mind, tell me where you're checking in from. Heartbreak is a real thing. It is a real thing, Rich. I agree with you. So my next guest is going to help us with that. She is an attachment style practitioner. And so y'all help me welcome Bev Mitelman. Hey, Bev.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
Yes, I am doing fantastic. And yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm so happy to be back on your channel with your audience. They are an insightful group. They generally ask great questions. So, heartbreak might not be the most fun topic to talk about, but I think we can still have a lively discussion.
Sure, I do too. But what I want to do more than that, because a lot of times, when people are going through quote unquote heartbreak, they don't know if they're coming or going. They don't know they can't make sense of things. They're telling themselves a story in their head, and they're trying to figure it out, and they don't have the answers they need. And then that leads people to come to conclusions.
Yes.
All right. And so what I wanted to do from your perspective, I think you're taking a little bit different approach. Today we're going to talk about, I guess, overcoming heartbreak from attachment styles. That's your specialty. But give us a little background on you and why you got into attachment styles and how you ended up doing the work you're doing.
Sure. And thank you for the opportunity. So, my name is Bev Mitelman. I'm the founder of securelyloved.com. We focus specifically on attachment theory and helping folks who are insecurely attached move towards secure attachment. And as many practitioners in this area, they'll tell a similar story. I grew up in a pretty difficult environment. I didn't have an easy childhood. And so I developed a set of patterns, which are, a set of beliefs and
Hmm.
thoughts and emotions and behaviors and actions that I didn't understand. I knew they were there. I didn't understand it. And I had gone to great lengths to try and understand my own mind. Why was I doing these things, which were not helping me in adulthood at all?
Hmm.
So I had sought out lots of different modalities of therapy. And when I found attachment theory, that's when things started to change for me. So I'm not here to say that other modalities aren't good, because I think that we all find what works for us. And sometimes it's a variety of things, and that's okay too. But for me, attachment theory really explained why I was having these emotional patterns. And it gave me a plan forward for how can I move out of feeling this way. So once I was able to identify my own core wounds, everything followed from there. My thought patterns changed, my emotional patterns changed. I calmed down, my nervous system calmed down, which was
Mm.
a blessing. Um,
Yeah, I
it,
know.
it was a blessing, because the worst thing people would say, just calm down. I'd be like, listen, if I could, I would.
Right, 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 right. No doubt
Right.
about that.
But it is possible, and I was just grateful to have found this modality. And so now, I've dedicated my life to introducing attachment theory and working with folks on attachment issues. And how does this relate to heartbreak? Well, in a very simple way, attachment theory and your attachment style actually impacts all the relationships that you have in your life: romantic, friends, colleagues, family, and particularly the relationship that you have to yourself.
Mhm.
So once you can understand that, it's very easy to see how you would, if you're one particular style or another, adopt certain coping mechanisms when you're dealing with grief. Right.
Right.
So that's what we're going to dive into a little bit. But spoiler alert, your attachment style really does impact how and the way in which you actually deal with grief and heartbreak, if we're going to talk about it in the romantic sense.
Mm, cool. So what I want you to do is give people who are listening to this just an overview of what attachment styles are, the types of attachment styles, and let's make it so a fifth grader could understand it.
Okay, absolutely. So I will try my best.
Yeah. All right.
Fifth
Cool.
grader. Okay.
All right. Sixth grader.
Okay.
Let's.
Thank you. So, attachment styles at its core, this is a set of learned behavior. So, to be really clear, this I'm not talking about mental illness, and I'm not talking about personality disorders. I'm talking about learned behavior for how we give and receive love. And this is patterning that we received generally very early on in our childhood. And this had to do with the level of attunement, the care, safety, and level of emotional attunement that we
Okay.
got from our caregiver. So, there's two broad categories of attachment styles: those that are considered securely attached, and those that are considered insecurely attached. So, and for the purpose of this discussion, I always say it's generally 50% of the population in North America is securely attached, and the other is insecurely attached.
Okay.
So, for the folks that are securely attached, these are people that grew up in homes where they felt safety, consistency, they were cared for, and their caregivers were emotionally attuned to them most of the time, right? Like, there's no such thing as perfection. We all make mistakes as parents. I'm a parent as well.
Hmm.
And what we're talking about is most of the time the child is able to predict that if they're going to come to me for a problem, or they're crying, they need support, they need love, they will receive the same response from me.
Okay.
Okay? So what that does is that child grows up as into an adult as someone who feels pretty self-assured. They're comfortable with themselves, and more importantly, they're comfortable with others around them.
Okay.
Right? Which makes sense. And these are the folks who have a secure attachment who do very well in relationships. They're the ones who have no problem having a good, emotional discussion without yelling, without getting upset. These are not the folks who are going to manipulate you. These are the folks who have a very good relationship to boundaries. They know themselves well. They have a healthy attitude towards interdependence in relationship. Like, I'm going to meet my own needs. I'm going to meet some of your needs. And it's not a codependency. So these folks do very well.
But here's what I want to say.
Yeah.
I have to push back on the study stuff.
I
I
knew
know,
you would.
because I coach a lot of people who have attachment style issues. So you got primarily 4 categories. All right. And I imagine you can speak to the 4 categories and we'll go over those. But they say 50% of the population is secured and 50% is unsecured. Now, three of the four categories are unsecured. But
Yeah.
you're saying that 50% of the population is secured and 50% unsecured. I beg to differ.
Okay.
I believe that there are more people who are have an insecure attachment style when we go over the 4 zones, if you will, 4 quadrants. That I would say 75% are insecure in one form or another. That's what I would say. And but we can debate that because I believe studies, you can make anything work. But that being said, let's talk about the 4 styles, 4 quadrants of
Sure.
attachment styles. And people can think about, and we can give a little brief description of each, and people can think about where they might fall.
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, statistics, right? It's difficult because these are generally it's self-reported, right? And I think that you and I both would hold a skewed view because we both work with clients that come to us. They generally have insecure attachment styles.
Sure.
So my viewpoint might be that the general population that it's a lot higher, but I try not to extrapolate from my own personal client base. But so we for sake of argument, we go 50-50. So we have those folks that are secure and those folks that are insecure. Now, as you're alluding to, within that insecure box, there are 3 subcategories, and it's a continuum. So on one side, we have what's called the anxious preoccupied. And that individual is someone who has as a core wound or a limiting belief that they will be abandoned.
Okay. So we got the anxious preoccupied, someone who feels like the core wound. This is the reason they do it. It's because on some level they believe that you're going to leave them. You're going to abandon them.
Yes.
All right. So they get anxious about that. So they hold on, right?
They hold on tight.
Okay.
So these are the folks who need quite a bit of external validation, reassurance. They're often what, I don't love this term, but they're often what people would call clingy or lots of drama. Or, I mean, again, in their childhood, they likely experienced some form of abandonment or perceived abandonment. And so once they've attached to you, they're just trying to hold on. Right? Like losing you would feel like the end of the world for them.
Right. I just had this on my TV show. We're filming an episode, and I told the young lady, her biggest fear, and I identified it, I guess, because I've worked with so many people. I was like, you have an anxious attack, you're preoccupied. And I said, and her whole thing is, I can take the person back, even if they cheat on me, just don't leave me. And so I've seen it, and I saw it in real life. So yes, I saw that.
Yeah. And you can see how someone who's more manipulative in character would love this type of person because they will get away with murder, right?
Yes.
The bar is so low like the pain of actually losing someone that you're attached to would be so tremendous for someone who's truly anxious, preoccupied, that they will accept breadcrumbs, they'll accept anything, which we know of course means that they haven't identified, they haven't developed the healthiest, sense of self-worth, right? That there is work to do there. They're also, this is not a group of people that generally does well with boundaries. They find, to some degree, they find boundaries offensive. Like when other people put up boundaries towards them, like, I would never do that to you. What do you mean I can't just stop in and say hello?
Right, right, right.
You know,
No,
it's
I
not a
get
good
it.
time,
No, I get it.
right? So yeah, these folks would be sensitive around that, and not great with boundaries. So to go back to the four categories as you were talking about, we have the anxious preoccupied, and then on the other side of the continuum, we have the dismissive avoidant. Now, the dismissive avoidant, again, comes out of a home where they were likely neglected.
Okay.
So, and we're talking about emotional neglect, sometimes, physical neglect as well. But most of the time it's more emotional neglect. So these folks grow up believing that they have a very strong shame wound. Like they believe that something is defective from within. Because when they needed their parents, they couldn't count on their parents, or their parents, weren't interested or didn't respond to them. So there's a very interesting learned helplessness that these folks develop. So, if I'm a young child and I go to my mother and I scrape my knee falling off a bike, and I try to get her attention, and she's too busy doing something else, or she really can't pay attention to me, I learn, why bother even asking? Why look for love, support, attention, validation? She's not going to give it to me. So if I'm feeling sad, I'm just going to have to buckle up and deal with it on my own, because I have nowhere to go. Right. And
Right.
so you could imagine that these children grow up with a sense of over self-reliance, right?
Okay.
And so really I can only count on myself. So in relationships, these are the folks that we see who generally really value their privacy, their freedom, their space. They're very slow to commit to a relationship. They're very slow to trust someone. Whereas the anxious, preoccupied person will jump into a relationship on date two. They're like, yeah, let's do this. I'm ready.
Right.
Right. Because
Right.
they just want to attach, because that's their sense of security for them. Right. That regulates their nervous system. Now, again, the dismissive avoidant would be much slower in that regard, much slower to open up, and they would protect their freedom. They also have some interesting traits around codependency. So these folks also struggle with interdependency. They were taught that from a young age, they needed to take care of their own needs. So they struggle with the concept of taking care of the needs of their partner. Like their mindset or their framework is, I take care of my own needs,
You
you
take
take
care
care
of
of your
yours.
own
Right.
needs, and
Right.
we
Right.
meet up and go to a movie, right? Like that's
Yeah.
where things are at.
And,
Uh,
and no, I just wanted to say something, but that makes sense because,
yeah.
some people are like, why are they going so fast? I need to take my time, and a lot of times taking their time is masking their attachment style because they see it as I'm taking my time, but really they're afraid of getting connected because they've been taught I do it myself, and they feel like. And let me ask you this: if they feel like if they get connected, that because you said the core wound is shame,
Mm-hmm.
and but I want to know how me connecting with you because I'm avoiding that. How is that attached to shame?
So the closer I get to you, the more time I spend with you, the more
Hmm.
vulnerable I am with you, the more you see the real me behind the mask,
Okay.
you might see that I'm actually not all that. You might
Got it.
see that I have issues. You might see that I'm actually defective, and you'll reject me.
Oh,
But
see,
if I keep things real surface and fun and I'm charismatic and, we don't get too close, you never really get to see the real me. You fall in love with the version of me that you think that I am.
mm, okay, okay, I
Yeah,
can see that.
it's safer, right? It's a protection mechanism.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm working with people now who we have two people in a relationship. One is avoidant, dismissive, and the other one is anxious, preoccupied.
Mhm.
So here's how the dynamic is playing out. And I'm sure you've seen it. But one person wants to be with the person all the time, want to be
Yeah.
with them. Hey, can we hang out? And the other person feels like, hey, no, 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 you're smothering me. You are smothering me. Um, and the other person is thinking, why not? You've got the time. And the other person is saying, I need to be by myself. I want to be by myself. I don't want to. And so I know you've seen this dynamic before. What happens in a case like that?
Yeah, I have seen this dynamic, and the internet is full of memes about this, which I don't particularly love. But one partner is running towards, and the other person is running away, right?
Right.
So this is what we call activating versus deactivating strategies, and they are at its core the same thing. Both individuals are trying to regulate their nervous system, but in completely opposite ways. So the anxious, preoccupied wants to activate and come towards their love interest, right? Because that calms them, that soothes them. Again, core wounds, I will
Mm-hmm.
be abandoned. So
Okay.
they seek physical proximity, right? And this is the person that if you're in a fight with them, they'll call 12 times in a row if you don't answer. And if you don't answer, they'll get in the car and drive over and go see you. Why were you taking my call? They need to see you in that moment because they're so dysregulated.
Mm.
Right. So they're fighting this idea that you're going to abandon them, that you're going to abandon them, that you're going to reject them, that you're going to leave them.
Wow. Wow. That
Now,
makes sense.
it does, right? Like this is really powerful. And you tend to have a little more empathy when you see really where this is coming from. It's coming from a place of dysregulation.
Okay.
So the opposite person in this example that you're talking about, the dismissive avoidant, they too are trying to regulate their nervous system, but the way that they do it is very different. They need to be alone. They need to be alone with their thoughts. They need to be alone in their space. Again, this is an individual who was neglected in childhood. They learned to find safety in isolation,
Mm.
right? So they might want to stay home for a day or two and just be in their own space, be with their own
Mm.
thoughts, not talk to anyone. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't love their partner, but the way in which they deal with conflict and communicate and their emotional patterns are distinctly different. And so we have a real problem when we have two partners who are in conflict and both trying to regulate their nervous system, and one is running towards and the other one is running away. And for those that have started to do the work or understand attachment styles, this is easily navigated by, just some clear cut, direct communication.
Mm. Right. Right.
Um, you know, uh, because I tend to be more on the avoidance side. So I have learned instead of just hiding, I will say to my partner, I just need some alone time. And when I say that, most of the time your partner will be very respectful. Will go, sure, no problem. We have dinner at 6 o'clock. You're going to be good for 6. Yeah, by then I'll be fine. Okay.
Right. Right.
So they won't keep trying to push towards me because that doesn't go well. Right? Because I'm putting up a boundary and I'm saying I need some space. But you got this other person, the anxious preoccupied, who doesn't understand boundaries, right?
Right.
They
Right.
have
Right.
to. They have to learn, or that relationship just is not. You're going to burn each other out.
So what I do when I come across this in couples, the biggest way that I see, Bev, is communication, effective communication.
Yeah.
Is listen. because that's the start of it. But a lot of people feel a certain way, but they never say it. And whenever you suppress what you're feeling, and then what happens is it creates more anxiety. I always tell people, if you want to reduce anxiety, over communicate, both parties. And what I mean by over communicate, I don't mean to the point where the other person's like, no, what I'm saying is if I'm feeling something, do not assume that the other person understands what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And so, because what a lot of times what creates anxiety is lack of communication. Because I don't know. Because there's a thing called sensory deprivation. When your senses, when you don't know what's going on, when your brain can't figure it out, it creates feedback. It starts saying, oh, well, the person, they haven't called you back because they're not really into you. Or they haven't called you back because you're a jerk. I mean, your brain begins to create it. And so that's what I found that as a baseline that starts to help that anxiety, that stabilization of the central nervous system.
Oh, absolutely. You're so right. So a couple of things. We are so good as humans at making stories. So we make up things when we don't know, we assume. And the reason we do this is because we're constantly looking for answers, especially if you're anxious, you tend to do this. You tend to overthink. And you tend to intellectualize your emotions instead of just feeling them. So I need to know the answer. Why is this happening? It must be because he's with another woman. We make up stories.
Yeah,
right? We do.
Yeah, we do.
And that causes us a tremendous amount of pain. And that is also a big part of why heartbreak is so difficult for us as well.
Yeah.
I just noticed actually, Rich, in the comments, I have the comments here. Is it possible we both anxious and dismissive at the same time? I'm so glad you asked the question, Rich. Thank you, because I realized that while we were talking about anxious, preoccupied, and we were talking about the dismissive avoidant, we forgot to mention the fearful avoidant, which is just in the middle. So that's the fourth category. Mm-hmm. And yes, to answer your question, Rich, the fearful avoidant is the individual who is known as the hot and the cold partner. They display traits of both those that are anxiously preoccupied and dismissive avoidantly attached, depending on who their partner is. So if, for example, a fearful avoidant is in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, they tend to lean more anxious. And the reverse is true as well. So they sort of oscillate back and forth. These individuals are people who came out of homes where there was a tremendous amount of chaos, unpredictability, and oftentimes abuse. And it could be abuse of any kind. And the pattern that forms in their mind is a core wound or a limiting belief of, I will be betrayed. Now, a core wound and a limiting belief is something that we saw and we lived and we experienced over and over, generally in our childhood, and we've adopted as a core truth that we have. It doesn't mean it's true, but we've adopted it as a truth. So it sits with us as a core belief. And most of the time, we're not even aware that it is filtering our thoughts and our emotions and certainly our behaviors. But it is. And so that's a lot of this core work. And to understand a fearful avoidance, I generally use an example of a child who, for example, comes home from school and is crying because they got bullied at school, let's just say, and they run towards the mother for support and love and for reassurance. Mommy, 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 I'm crying because, someone said that I was ugly at school, whatever. Children are very mean. And the mother, instead of showing love, instead of showing attention, does something mean towards the child, actually turns around and says, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Or slaps the child and said, we don't cry in this house. Little boys don't cry. Whatever, silly thing that comes out. What happens from a child's mind is that the person that they love the most in this world, the example I'm using is their mother, the person that they need to seek love and reassurance from is the one that's also harming them.
Mm.
And so this child becomes very disorganized in their thought process. In fact, another word for fearful avoidant is disorganized attachment,
Mm.
because the child both loves and fears the object of their affection, which is their caregiver. So this is why you could see in romantic relationships this oscillation between I want to get close, no, step back a little bit. Okay, I want to get close.
I seen that. I
Right.
seen people who do that. They want the person, and here's the dynamic about that. When they want the person to get close, they're like, "What's wrong?" To pull them close. Then the person starts coming close. They're like, hold up, no. I was just playing, just kidding, and I'm like, wow, because when I first encountered this a few years ago, I was like, it was this before I really got into the attachment theory. I was like, this is amazing to me that a person. I said, the person is giving you what it is you say you want, yet you push them away. And that now I understand why. At the time, I had no clue. But it's an amazing dynamic when you look at it, though.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, actually. So it's just a pattern, right? So again, unfortunately, we develop these patterns in childhood and we bring them into our adult years. They typically don't serve us anymore, right? They don't serve us well anymore. And we developed these patterns when we were young, and we were so dependent on our caregivers when we needed them for our survival. But they go deep into our subconscious and we're not aware of them. And then we bring them into adulthood. And so someone who is fearful avoidant, they really do want love and connection.
Right.
But as someone gets closer to them, they're metaphorically waiting to be slapped in the face.
Mm.
So they'll push you away a little bit so you can't get too close. And you have to remember their core wound is I will be betrayed. So they have a very hard time trusting other people. And it's not that this can't be overcome. It absolutely can. If you're dealing with someone who has fearful avoidance, I always say approach them like a deer, calmly. Don't
Right,
pounce.
right,
A
right.
little at a time, right? Like let them acclimate to you, let them build trust. This is not the person that you're going to get into a relationship with on the second date.
Mm, right, right, right. So how do you handle, and I want to switch gears and move to, now that we've gone over, move to the rejection part. I mean, the heartbreak part of it. But navigating a person who has this push pull, this fearful avoidant, um, they have this push pull. Um, as a person who's in a relationship with that type of person, okay, from your perspective, how do you approach them so that you don't ostracize them, don't push them away, but how would you approach them about what you're feeling about their behavior?
So I spent most of my time in my life as a fearful avoidant. So I know this instinctually and academically, of course. But um, what I can tell you is that honesty is incredibly important. Honesty and transparency is the antidote to betrayal.
Mm.
Right. So the more honest you can be, the more forthright you can be. A fearful avoidant typically will not shy away from having a tough conversation. They will feel threatened or unsafe if they think or they're aware that you are lying to them, or that you're not telling them the truth, or that you're concealing something. Or so I would say that the most important element to keep in mind is honesty. So if there's something that you want to talk to your partner about, come at it from a place of this is why I want to talk about it. Like not because I want to break up with you. It's because I want our relationship to get better, but it is bothering me. I have this need. And I think it's honoring to you to tell you this is what I'm thinking. So can we work on it? right? So that is, if you're able to do that, I think most of the time someone who is fearful avoidant, especially if you already have a level of trust established, it depends where you are in the relationship. But that will be the make or break. It's always around trust for someone who has fearful avoidance. So take it slow and build that trust meter. And, understand that if you do something that is deceiving,
Mm-hmm.
that might be a deal breaker for the
Might,
fearful avoidant.
okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Whereas the anxious preoccupied, like what you said in your example, you can go out and do whatever you want, just come home to me.
Right.
The anxious preoccupied will forgive everything
Mm.
because they just are so afraid you're going to leave. The fearful avoidant is not afraid you're going to leave. They have standards, and they're afraid of being betrayed. So I will stay with you as long as you are on the up and up with me. The minute you show me that you do something that I can't trust you, we're done.
We're done.
Done.
We're done. We're done
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Like game over.
We're done here.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
All right, let's talk about how this works in getting over heartbreak. You break up, somebody did betray you, or somebody did abandon you in a relationship. You're heartbroken. How do you cope with using attachment style and understanding attachment style and moving beyond or mending heartbreak or getting through the phases of grief is what heartbreak is essentially.
Okay. So I have quite a few things to say. It's a very meaty topic. We'll do our best here.
Yeah, yeah, we'll hit it high level and we'll talk about if somebody wants to go deeper, we can talk about how they can move past this, but just high level.
Okay. So our research does indicate that someone who is insecurely attached, and this wouldn't surprise you at all, will have a more heightened response to rejection and loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so this goes back to, for example, the anxious preoccupied who has an already existing wound. Before you've come on the scene as their partner, they already have a wound that will be abandoned. So if that actually does occur, it hits them in a way that is much harder to deal with, much more intense than someone who didn't have that wound. And so I often use the example to understand intensity of emotions, in that the mind is very similar to the physical body, in that if we have a wound on our body, so for example, we have a cut on our arm, and somebody throws a baseball at us, right? And it hits that place where there's already a cut and we got stitches and there's a deep wound there. Right. And they throw the baseball and it hits, the damage is huge, right? It could split open the stitches, it could start bleeding again. Like the damage can be really massive because you're hitting on a wound that's already there that has not yet been healed. Okay. That's important to keep in mind. Now, if we take a baseball and we hit my other arm, I'm going to feel it. But likely I'm just going to swing out the arm and go, whew, I'll get a little bruise and okay, but it's not going to put me down for 3 weeks.
Right. Got it. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy.
So whenever you already have an existing wound, when you hit it again, it's going to be more intense and the healing process is going to be more like a prolonged period. So this is what we call complicated grief. Okay. So those that have insecure attachment, they are much more prone to what we call complicated grief. There are certain stages that we go through during the healing process. Okay. Like the initial stage when we're feeling numb, and then we go into the searching, yearning stage before we go into disorganization and then reorganization, which is a bit of a different grief model than probably what you've heard before.
Yeah, that's a little different than what I've heard.
I think you've probably heard denial, anger, bargaining, depression,
bargaining, yes,
and acceptance. So Listen, they're very similar. This is a 4-point model that's under the lens of attachment style. But the reason I bring this into discussion is because those that have insecure attachment, they generally spend a lot of time in that second phase. After the initial numbness, they go into yearning and searching. Um,
Oh,
and so they spend a lot of time trying to relive memories. They'll start looking at photos, they'll look at
oh wow.
memory books, they'll revisit restaurants, they'll re-listen to voicemails. They're searching. They will also display a number of behaviors at this point in time to get their partner back, right? So they are
Right.
not ready to accept the reality of what's going on. So when we're saying searching and yearning, people dependent again on the level of hurt that they're feeling, which is directly correlated to how attached the individual was. So it does
Mm,
matter where you were in your stage of relationship, how much trust you afforded this person. It's not, being attached is not necessarily a function of time. It's not like we were together 10 years. Lots of people are together 10 years and they're not all that attached to one another.
right. I see that too.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Right. And some people, they're together, 3 months, and if they break up, that is the end of the world, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so again, it's important to recognize it's not a function of time. It really has to do with how much trust you have afforded this individual, and
Mm,
how actually attached you are to them. So anxious preoccupieds will spend a lot of time in that yearning and searching phase. This is where they'll display a lot of those clingy behaviors. They'll try to get their partner back. They'll try to negotiate anything to have to not deal with the pain of rejection and loss.
right. I see a lot of times during this phase where people begin to bargain with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They begin this dialogue of, well, if I had done this, if I had had sex 5 times a week
Mm-hmm.
instead of one, they would still be here. So this back and forth dialogue that people have with themselves is a coping mechanism too. And sometimes though, it becomes destructive though. And here's why. Because the dialogue, the question comes forward. You answer the question out of the same mind that has experienced the pain, the grief, the loss. And so the mind is trying to make sense of it. But the only way it makes sense of it is to give answers that it deems rational, but they may be irrational. And I'm just asking you, have you ever encountered that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, almost 100% of the time. So making up stories is a big thing that we do. That's like in another section. I'm definitely gonna get to it, I promise, because it's a big thing. Now, it's also important to talk about regulation of the nervous system. When we are in parasympathetic nervous system mode, and which in layman's terms would be fight or flight,
Right.
right? Our nervous system is so heightened, we're having a stressful response. We're not capable, no one is, of producing logical, rational thought,
Right.
right? So any which stories and thoughts that we have are not going to fall onto the rational side, right? They're not going to make sense, but
Right.
we will choose to believe them anyways in the moment because we're yearning and searching for answers. We need to know, why did this happen? What did I do?
Right.
And you can see how it's just a jump and a leap away from, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't pretty enough, right? Like
True.
these,
True.
right? Yeah. So we're gonna get to that. So the type of attachment style that you have will greatly affect the way in which you approach the grieving process. So someone, for example, who's dismissive avoidant, these are folks again who have that learned helplessness around, why would I bother to ask anyone for help? No one's going to help me. I just have to do it on my own. I'll get through this on my own, like I've gotten through everything else on my own. So they're not the type of people who are going to seek, any sort of therapeutic support. They're not likely going to pick up a phone and call a friend. They're likely going to isolate. They're likely going to, especially during the numbing and the yearning and searching phase, which are the two phases before we come to acceptance, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to lean on what we call their creature comforts. So the things that they do that bring them calmness, that help regulate, or that they think help regulates their nervous system. So and this is where we see all sorts of funky behaviors. People have all sorts of things that they do to numb themselves out from pain. So what they're doing is, this is too uncomfortable, I'm going to do all this other crap over here so that I don't have to deal with this uncomfortable pain. And Ken, you could probably name a few of these numbing behaviors that we tend to do.
Yeah, I get it. Man, we do a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of times people get it consumed with work. Work, work,
Yeah.
work, 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 work. A lot of people get consumed with other things, porn or drugs or whatever else.
Alcohol, gambling, shopping.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Amazon coming every day. You're
Amazon
like,
coming every day.
what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, and some people, for example, even use exercise as a distraction. You would think that's not a bad thing. It is if you're going for 3 jogs a day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're overdoing it, right? So anything that's done excessively, not for the purpose of health, but purpose of distraction,
right.
Is something we use for numbing. But typically food is often used, right? It's like, I'm in a mood, get me a tub of ice cream, right? Drugs, alcohol, you mentioned this. So these are all ways in which we try to get over grief during that numbing phase 1 and 2, and the searching and the yearning. I don't want to search and yearn and think about the good memories because I'm focused on the loss. So I'm just going to drown this out. The dismissive avoidance too, even when they get over the heartbreak, they're not necessarily the folks that are going to have the easiest time forming new relationships. So if you talk about a fearful avoidant as well, that betrayal wound, if they were betrayed in that relationship, entering into a new relationship will be even that more difficult for them because you've triggered their wound. The same with an anxious preoccupied. If their abandonment wound was triggered and now they're thinking of getting into another relationship, that might, present itself as yet another challenge.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they keep these, it does, right? So these patterns keep playing out. The other interesting thing about this particular group of people is that they don't necessarily have the best understanding of their own emotions, their own patterns, and healthy coping techniques. And the reason I say this is because we go back to their childhood. They didn't grow up in a home where this was modeled for them, right? So I like to use the example of some kids are fortunate enough to grow up in a home where their parents taught them how to cook, right?
Okay.
Great skill. And some children grow up in a home where their parents didn't teach them how to cook.
True,
right? So the same can be said for emotional regulation, conflict management, communication skills. Some children grew up in a home where, how to handle your emotions in a healthy, constructive way simply wasn't modeled for them. They don't have the techniques. They've never learned how to do it. So that's all of these characteristics add to the complicated grief scenario. What does that mean? It means a couple of things. Those that are already insecurely attached, they are likely going to have a harder time. It's not impossible, but a harder time getting over the loss. And that's for a few reasons. First of all, they're starting from a place of typically in a dysregulated nervous system. Right? So a dysregulated nervous system, if we're talking about anxiety, for example, and somebody wakes up and they get out of bed and they are revved up at an 8 out of 10.
Okay.
And the day just started, right? And now you throw anything at them. They're driving to work and someone cuts them off. They're going to blow up.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are volatile. They're going to yell. They're going to scream. They're going to be, because they're already dysregulated to a point where it's almost like they're like a volcano waiting to explode. But now you throw something real their way, like a breakup from their partner who they love and adore and rely on to meet their needs. It's going to put them into a zone of, I am overwhelmed by this. Right. So, and I feel for these people, right? And they're going to fight like crazy to keep that relationship, because the idea of having to process that grief, given where they already are at this dysregulated space, is just too difficult. Now, if you wake up and you get out of bed and you're like a 1 or 2 out of 10 in terms of your anxiety, you're feeling calm, someone cuts you off at work, on the way to work, cuts you off, you probably slam on the brake and go, whew, glad I didn't get into an accident.
Right.
And by the time you got to the office, you forgot about it. It meant nothing to you. And then your partner calls you and says, listen, we need to talk. Like, we're done. You're going to feel it. It's going to hurt you, but it's not going to put you over the edge.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, because your starting point matters.
So let me, one of the things we didn't say, we said there were 4 quadrants. The other quadrant was secured. I don't want people to think that part, we never said it, but they're the 4 quadrants, and they might be thinking, well, what's the 4th one? But is it a secured attachment style?
Right. Yeah. I originally said there was like 2 categories, secure and insecure.
Right.
And if you're insecure, there's 3 subcategories, but we can definitely look at it as there's 4 categories. Right. And the first one is secure, and that's what we aim towards, right? That's the utopia.
Right. Utopia.
So
go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Well, so I was gonna talk a little bit about, again, sort of moving on or getting through heartbreak.
Okay, go ahead. That's good.
So you've already brought this up, and you were spot on. We tend to create stories. So especially when we are not necessarily thinking rationally, and we're in a heightened emotional response. If somebody, let's say in that moment, breaks up with us and we're feeling a tremendous amount of heartbreak and grief, we tend to make stories that create even further pain and suffering for our own selves, right? Which most of the 9 out of 10 times these stories aren't true. We make them up and we convince ourselves that they're true. So it's things like, we've already talked about this, right? It's like, if I had had more sex with them, they would have stayed. If I was prettier, they would have stayed. If I had gotten him a nicer gift for Christmas.
Right.
Like if I knew how to cook better or whatever it is, right? So, and those statements are almost always blaming us. We did something, or we're not good enough. That's where those statements come from, speaking to our self-worth, or sometimes also building in that core wound, depending on if you have this or not, but I'm unlovable, I'm unlikable, right? I'm not enough. There's dozens of different core wounds that can show up for folks depending on the experiences that you had as a child. So to really tackle this, it's really important that you start becoming aware of your thoughts. And this might sound silly because people are like, of course I know my thoughts. But actually most people
don't have a clue what their thoughts are.
I mean, everyone can tell you that they've got a million thoughts running on in their head, right? That's normal. But to stop and pay attention and go, what did I just tell myself? And right. And so pay attention to your thoughts. If someone is going through heartbreak right now, I would recommend take a little notebook, take a little pen. And when you have that thought that enters your mind, and it could be fleeting, or the thought could be with you for 2 days, write it down. Write it down. Okay. Just take note of it. And I'd also suggest to take note of any associated emotions, right? Or any physical symptoms that you're feeling. So if I'm repeatedly telling myself, my partner broke up with me because I'm not pretty enough, Okay, I'm not pretty enough. That's the story I'm telling myself. Do I know that's true? Do I know it's not true? I don't.
True.
Right?
True.
I don't know, but that's still the story I'm telling myself. And what is the emotion that's coming up? Like, am I feeling sad? I'm feeling this burning in my heart. My stomach is in knots. My muscles feel tense. It's really giving me a strong stress response. Okay, so marking all of that down, becoming familiar with the physical symptom, the physical traits of your emotions is very important.
Very, very important.
Very important, because most people, again, they don't recognize their thoughts, and they certainly don't recognize their emotions. So I had a beautiful conversation with one of my clients yesterday, where we're going through this exercise to identify emotions. And it's the first time that she's realized that she actually doesn't know what she's feeling.
No, I know. Being conscious of your thoughts and your emotions is it's a powerful way to start this process, because what it does is it makes you self-aware. And a lot of us are not self-aware. First off, I always say the first step is to self-reflect. Reflect on how I got here. Again, now begin asking those questions. Then when I begin to self-reflect, then I begin to look at, okay, I act this way. I'm becoming aware of how my emotions are affecting me, how they're affecting others around me, how this triggers me. That's the self-awareness part of it. And those two things are the way I start with people. And part of the self-awareness is making you conscious of your thoughts and emotions. What are you feeling today? Tell me why you're feeling that. Let's challenge that. And so that's how I work with people in it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I love the idea of being conscious of your thoughts and emotions. Love it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that when we talk about healing through heartbreak, and I'm using the word through heartbreak,
Sure.
that really is the only way to do it, right? So there's only so long you can run away from the uncomfortable feelings, right? And you can numb out. So you do have to start to become comfortable with uncomfortable feelings. It's like incremental exposure. So if you start to feel these feelings a little bit, and you start to go, okay, I know what you are. I recognize you. You're trying to tell me something, because our emotions are there to serve a purpose, right? They guide us. So if I recognize you, I give you space, and I go, I know why you're there. I also know that you never stay around too long. So that's good. You're going to leave me soon. Right. So
Right.
because our emotions come and go, but some emotions are so frightening.
Yeah,
Like,
but and I want to give people statistics. They say the average emotion, the longest it will ever stay, and this is why I always say people sit in the emotion, is 19 minutes. 19 minutes is the long. If you're mad as hell, they said the longest it will stay is 19 minutes. The average time is 5 to 7 minutes. So if you sit in your emotion, if you sit there and analyze, say, accept, okay, I'm feeling this. Go through the process. For 10 minutes, it will leave you, more than likely. But it said the 19 minutes is the longest.
yeah, I love that you just shared that. That's so great. And what happens is that the more familiar you become with your sensations, the less intense they come and the less frequent they are. Now, emotions are not good or bad, right? Like,
They're not.
we tend to attribute certain traits to emotions, like anger is bad and happy is good. Each emotion is there to serve a purpose. They're indicators for us. So feel it, name it, understand where in your body you're feeling it, and take note of all this stuff. So I'll share with your audience, when I was incredibly stressed, I had this weird thing that used to happen. My eyelid would flutter. You
Okay.
couldn't see it, but I felt it.
But you felt it.
I felt this little fluttering. Now I had, of course, there's something wrong with my eye. I went to the eye doctor, and he said, "Beth, your eyes are fine." And I said, "Well, they can't be, because my eyelid is fluttering." And he said, "Oh, well, that does happen sometimes when people are really stressed or they haven't slept enough."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, okay,
So my
okay.
eye starts fluttering.
So that,
Uh,
you know what, Ken, when I feel a little twitch, I go, you're right. I didn't get enough sleep. Thank you for telling me.
okay. 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 Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
for years I was like, God, that eyelid, that's so annoying. Now it's a gift. I know exactly what it's telling me.
Good. That's good stuff.
Right? Yeah.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. But I'm gonna let you go because we only have 5 minutes. I want you to
Five
get the
minutes.
rest of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get through this. So, again, identify the stories and the thoughts that you're telling yourself. One of the things that we do when you're a little further along your healing journey is, of course, we start to build new stories, right? So instead of
Mhm.
the story of, no one else is going to love me the way that he did, we build new stories. This happened for a reason, so I could understand what self-love was about. And now I'm ready for the next chapter. Whatever that story may be, that comes a little bit later down through the healing process. But while you're really in those earlier weeks of heartbreak, it's very important to be compassionate with yourself. I see a lot of clients and folks who either compare themselves to other people or compare a current experience to previous experiences. So if they're really struggling to move on to let go of the pain that they have, they'll shame themselves. Like, I've broken up with men before and it took 3 weeks and I was done.
Mm.
Right? Or this has been 6 months. This is crazy. Why do I still feel this way? So all of that is not helpful, right?
Wow.
You will take as long as you need, and you need to be compassionate about it. There's no
I agree.
two relationships that are the same.
I agree.
And again, it has to do with how attached you were to this person, right? So allow yourself the time without shame or guilt, because if you do that, I'm telling you, you will stay in the yearning phase longer,
Oh, wow.
because you're
Wow.
not allowing yourself to pass through. When people talk about healing, and this is interesting, it's like I see these memes on Instagram, like
Yeah.
healing is about becoming the best version of yourself. And I'm like, is it? So I have a different definition of healing. For
I'd
me,
like to hear yours.
yeah, for me, healing is about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, accepting all parts of myself, the parts that I
Mm.
really enjoy and the parts that I don't enjoy, but they all make up a part of me. And if
Yes.
I have a part that comes online that isn't my favorite part, I'm still going to say, hey there, I know who you are. Don't stay too long, but it's nice to see you.
Good. Good. I love it. I love it. That is. I love that. That's good. That's good stuff. That's making me think. No, that's
Because again, and nothing becomes more obvious around, embracing the qualities that you don't love about yourself is when you're going through heartbreak, because this is
wow.
where you become so critical of yourself, right?
Mm.
So and or you spend an enormous amount of time trying to understand your partner and why they did what they did, which is also not helpful.
That's good stuff.
So we do all of this stuff. I'm going to spend all this time figuring out why the hell this person did this. It's everything we do before we get to the acceptance phase. So the longer we spend yearning and searching, right? We don't allow ourselves to move into the acceptance phase, which is the reparation. We're going to reorganize our life now to the new reality of what's in front of us.
Right.
So
Mm.
some people take years and they hold on to mementos and knickknacks, and and really they're not necessarily helping themselves move on, right?
Wow. Powerful.
So another quick thing, I know we're coming to time. We talked about regulating your nervous system.
Hmm.
And there's so many beautiful ways you can do this through somatic work and exercise and breath work, and rest. It's very important to allow your body to
Mm.
rest during this healing phase. You would instinctively know that, for example, if you had surgery, that you would need to have a period of rest, right, to recover. Heartbreak, you need a period of rest. It's a
Mm.
very stressful moment and your body needs to recalibrate and rest. It will never rebalance itself if you are sleep deprived.
Yes. Yes. That is very true.
you need to sleep, you need to do that without guilting yourself. Like, why the hell am I sleeping so much? Okay, so you slept 10 hours last night. Great, you needed it.
Yeah, you needed it. And the body restores, rejuvenates, rebalances,
Mhm.
all of that during sleep.
Yeah.
For those of you listening. And it doesn't mean that, I mean, everybody needs a different amount of sleep. But if you're sleeping longer, don't fight that. Accept that the body is telling you, this is what I need.
Yeah, anxiety and stress can be absolutely physically taxing on the body, like you ran a marathon. And people don't
Absolutely.
realize that. So,
Oof.
the last thing I would say here is that part of the reason that heartbreak hurts so much is because we focus on the loss, and we also focus on our unmet needs. So there are certain things that other individual was giving to us that were so,
Mm.
critically important to us. So understanding your needs, what do you need as a person so that your cups are full and you feel satiated and happy and at peace, right? A lot of these things, even if you haven't been taught how to do it, you can learn how to give a lot of this stuff to yourself or to get your needs met through other types of relationships other than romantic relationships. And so at that point, when you're, gone through the path of healing and you're ready to get into a new romantic relationship, you're coming at it from a much more balanced place. So, you're not just healing, but you're growing. So that's what I would say to folks.
That's amazing, Beth. Beth, thank you so much. Listen, for those of you who are listening, I'm gonna give you two options. If you want to reach out to Beth, she's got a free test on her website, is at securelyloved.com.
Yes.
And that right there, take the test. And I think you have a free session, right, that they can get.
I do. Thank you, Ken. Yes, my website is securelyloved.com. That's with a D at the end, securelyloved.com. Yeah, there is a free attachment style quiz. It takes about 10 minutes. It's a great place to start with understanding your own mind and your own patterns. And then you can also book a free consultation call with myself or any of the other practitioners that I work with at Securely Loved. And we'd be happy to talk to you about your specifics and some of the work that we do in helping folks move towards secure attachment.
And Bev, also in my Relationship Academy, she's teaching this month on overcoming rejection. I mean, heartbreak.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested in my academy, we touch on all things relationships, dating, conflict resolution, attachment styles. We take a holistic point of view when it comes to all things relationship. And we believe the most important relationship you will have is the one that you have with yourself. If you are interested in it, just go to therelationshipacademy.co. Therelationshipacademy.co. And listen, Beth, I'll see you on Friday.
That's great. And I'm so glad you brought up the Relationship Academy because I have worked with your group within the academy a couple of times now.
Yeah.
Really intelligent people. They ask great questions, like they're curious and very committed to understanding and growing. So you have a beautiful community there.
Thank you so much. And I got a lot of good coaches, y'all. All right, Beth. All right. See you later.
Thank you,
We'll
Ken.
talk. And listen, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us. Listen, we're going to probably start doing some more lives during the day because I like it. All right. Y'all, take care.